was interesting watching the reactions on people's faces. There was a lot of times where people were like, oh, I thought y'all were normal.
Hi, I'm Erika. I am a daughter of God, a wife, mom, a physician, board certified in internal medicine and geriatrics. And I get to teach here at George Fox on the PA program. And I get to teach pathophysiology to a group of very bright, hardworking, fun students. And I'm here today with longtime friends of mine, Jeff and Abbie Nelson. We met 20-some years ago. Abbie, I think you were the first visitor we had in the hospital when our oldest was born. So excited to talk with y'all and be here today.
Yeah, same.
I recall that y'all have a history in Newburgh.
We do. So I was in the PsyD program from 2008 or 2003 till 2008. And then Abbie and I met at a Halloween party with our cohort through some family friends of hers from Texas. And Abbie showed up as a Rorschach card, which is a projective test. And she was wearing all black. And I walked up and I was like, "Who are you?" And she grabbed a poster board and came back and said, "What do you see?" And I was like completely smitten.
So
I couldn't stop talking about it.
It was tricky because it was, the prompt was, come to a Halloween party. That's all psychologists. And
what do you wear?
What do you wear to that they won't? I thought, oh my goodness, they're going to analyze whatever I show up in. So I decided to go as a projective test, which I thought was hilarious. And anyway, the rest is history. We got married the next summer. So you finished you were in the PsyD program.
I was, yeah. And so for a year, we were in Miami for internship. And that, for me, was a spark of missions and thinking about planning a church with some family friends of ours. And I wasn't able to find meaningful work in Miami. And so we came back having a church family and friends and reconnected with you all again. And really dove into a small church in Portland.
Looking back in your time at George Fox, I don't get to cross paths with the PsyD department as much as I'd like to. So I'm curious, what was it like for you to study psychology here, opposed to maybe a program that's not intentionally seeing an integration of faith and medical learning, mental health learning?
I can't imagine not doing it otherwise. It's just thinking about what that means is entering in fully into the therapeutic relationship as a believer. It'd be like a missed area. And so for me, for so many reasons, it was a good fit. I think a smaller model as a cohort, it's a very eclectic group of believers, but there was really intentionality around prayer. And I think the mix of professors like Mark Buchman stands out. So, and Roger Bufford and a few other faculty, there's a long list, but just that really, I think impacted me in significant ways. And so having that amount of time in supervision as a believer, and I was still really young. I was 23 when I started, so still trying to figure out who I am in the world as a believer. And so to have a smaller group of people walk through that season was really great. And so, yeah.
That's good to hear.
I'll probably stop there because I could say more about that.
Well, our motto at Fox is to be known. So that's good to hear.
I felt known.
Back in 2008, that was the case, and it's still very much the heart of our goal as faculty here. So that's good to hear.
Yeah, they were super approachable. So if I had a question of the director, I could go talk to the director that day. And
I enjoyed our walk this morning to Friends View. We got some coffee at Friends View, which is a senior living facility here in town, and you were reflecting how you got to do some of your clinicals interviews there. And what a gift to be able to practice knowing people on a therapeutic level with the generation that has a lot to teach us. Those were my favorite patient interviews when I was going through medical school. So
I would say that was the bulk of my practice in Oregon before we left for Guatemala. So it was mainly older adults. so 65 and older, and I think other clinicians were a little bit hesitant, but the stories like really stand out. And so there was so much to take away and learn, and yeah, there's a sweetness to it. It's a very different now. It's a larger spectrum of adults that I meet with.
Yeah.
But
Tell me about that now. You're in Newburgh. You met each other. You had an awesome costume. You started a family here in Portland, and then what led to the work you're currently doing?
Yeah, so all three of our girls were born here in Newburgh, and we were living in Portland, and we were very involved in our church. I had been an ER nurse for a long time, mostly at St. Vincent, and then I decided to go back to nurse practitioner school because I felt like I really wanted to be more in a like primary care role. So I did that at Gonzaga and finished in 2013 and started working at a tiny little primary care clinic out in Canby. And loved that time. Also worked with a lot of older adults, but did the full spectrum of primary care work. But we were, during those years, really felt a sense of, we started to refer to it as godly discontent, of a sense that we were not where God wanted us to be in terms of building our family and doing, working into our calling. And we had good, meaningful work here in Oregon, taking care of all sorts of different kind of people and learning a lot about kind of the depth and breadth of care for the human body. And
being Christian providers in a very secular city.
Yeah.
I think was.
Yeah. Being I think one of the big ways that we did ministry in Portland was just being we live in Northeast Portland, and being out of the closet Christians in a very secular space was revolutionary for us and for the people around us. I remember when it was time for us to leave for Guatemala and our girls were going to a little public elementary school in Northeast Portland, I just decided to fly in the windshield, tell people that we were going to be missionaries. Because we would have these conversations with other families at our school. They'd be like, oh, you're going to Guatemala. That seems like, what a great experience for your family. What a great adventure. And I'm like, yeah, that's true. But it was also not what it was. And to say that we feel called by the Lord, who knows us and loves us, to go and care for the poor in a way that is different than what we've been doing here. And we committed to 5 years. And we were walking away from not wealth, but the capacity for wealth, and having to kind of grapple with what that meant. And anyway, and it was interesting watching the reactions on people's faces, because there was a lot of times where people were like, oh, I thought y'all were normal. I couldn't believe that we were people that go to church.
Or other believers who challenged that too.
Who came out and said wow, I didn't know you go to church. We go to church. And so that, I think in a place like Portland, which feels itself like a mission field a lot of the time, it was hard for us to raise support from the church here because there was a sense of betrayal of that you guys are bailing on this mission field to go to that mission field and you want us to support you, was kind of the undercurrent. Not everybody. But anyway, it was interesting. But yeah, we felt very specifically called to Guatemala.
And it was a long discernment process.
It was a long discernment process. I think it was a 4-ish year process of taking trips and finding an organization and seeing a lot of bad projects that are kind of doing malpractice in the mission field, which we don't talk enough about, I think, in public, about the ways that good-intentioned Americans go out into the world and do harm.
I remember having conversations with you all during that time period when you were discerning this and praying about it. Yeah. And I remember we all went to church together in a somewhat small church where there wasn't a lot of money to support missionaries.
No, there was not. There was almost no money. We could barely pay rent.
Yeah. So. And I remember you being concerned about, I don't want to do more harm. I don't want to do more harm than good, and having good intentions, but our presence not being Christ, the fragrance of Christ, right, but instead being just doing more harm than good. And so I remember you being very intentional about wanting to get trained to support the local church and the local health care community.
Yeah.
And so tell us, what does that look like now? What is the work that each of you are doing with your own occupational skills, and then also as a partnership and as a family? What is the work you're doing?
That's a good question. Yeah, because I feel like a lot of it was this long process, like in that discernment was like building real relationships and trying to avoid like repeating previous sins. And it's still messy and we're going to sin. But I feel like God has definitely used that. But to have like real cultural liaisons that were there to guide and to say, these are the real needs, rather than we could see things as like, this country is very broken and here's the research. Like, it seems like there is this need in particular as far as a need for mental health providers and medical providers, and there's a lack of access to care, and those are obvious things. But how do we go about this? And what have you tried, or how do we come alongside and be more supportive versus the top down, which can easily happen?
One of our values for our team, our organization is called Surge, and its tagline is Grace at the Fray. And we were attracted to them because they really value doing ministry from a place of weakness and admitting your weakness going into it. Something that gets said a lot is that Jesus doesn't make missionaries ready and then send them out. He actually just goes with you. Anyway, we committed at the beginning to submit to national leadership. So for me, what that looks like is I work under a Guatemalan physician named Dr. Lila Chanquin, and she is super Guatemalan. She's kind of a force of nature. She was an ER physician for a long time. Now she's a grandmother, but she's a pastor's wife, and she and her husband pastor this big church that had a lot of physical healthcare needs. And so she was on her weekends doing clinic out of the back of the church. And at some point, it just grew, and ministry investment got made with a couple of organizations in the United States, and she was able to build a clinic building. So we have a little 3-story building. And the first floor is a waiting room and a couple of exam rooms. And then the second floor, we have got a hospital-grade ultrasound machine and a pharmacy and a lab and a phlebotomy space. And then the third floor has a couple of classrooms and a bunch of storage space. So it's a concrete block building, and sometimes things don't work very well, but it is a great building, and it's right in the middle of the garbage dump community in Guatemala City. So there's about 40,000 people that live in this, what's called a red zone. So it's like a really dangerous kind of gang-controlled neighborhood. And most of the people that live in the neighborhood work in the garbage dump, pulling out trash that can be recycled. So just extreme poverty and a lot of needs. And what Lila needed when I showed up in 2018, 2019 was help with a diabetes program. She said, can you do something with these diabetes patients she had a lot of older adults that were coming to the clinic every day, needing to be seen and get their medicines refilled. And in Guatemala, there's not enough healthcare infrastructure for them to have like primary care is not really a thing in Guatemala. And there's not a Walgreens on the corner that you can just go to and get your medicine. And when you make $1 a day working in the garbage dump, you don't have money for insulin. There's just no way. So a lot of people just die in their 50s and 60s of diabetes and untreated hypertension. So anyway, what Lila said was essentially, I'm ER, and she likes to do walk-in clinic, and she can see 30 people in a morning and move really fast. But these complicated internal medicine patients really needed program. So that's what I did is I built a diabetes program and set up a formulary and some treatment protocols, and I'm the primary care provider for that program. And we have about 250 patients that I see very regularly for primary care and for diabetes and chronic disease management. But working under Lila's supervision has been such a gift. It's been humbling for me. There's a lot of things that I don't understand about the way she does things sometimes, but as I've spent time and over the years have begun to understand and respect her process. And I've learned so much from her, and it was a better way to do it. I could have gone into the community and hung out a shingle and started my own program by myself, but I think that would not have been the right way to do it. And I think this is better. So anyway, but that's my piece.
Yes.
And
so I'm gonna geek out in medicine for a second. So sounds like there was somewhat of an infrastructure for handling emergencies or handling just appointments that were needed for one time.
Mm-hmm.
But what there wasn't in this area where you all moved is care for chronic disease.
Right.
Yeah.
And diabetes is a pretty silent disease until the complications of years of having too much glucose in the blood tears our blood vessels apart and creates this physiology for high blood pressure, heart disease, losing a limb.
Yeah.
I've read your stories of patients who would need to have a leg cut off because of the blood vessel damage in the legs. And then ultimately it ends in early death.
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard you lament that this is all preventable.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're coming with much needed ongoing walking with patients in their chronic disease and advocating for them to get the basic meds. Can we take one step back from a public health standpoint? Why in a place where there's so much poverty, why is the blood sugar high? What are the different factors that are setting up for the development of diabetes in so many patients?
Yeah. So the prevalence of diabetes is rising rapidly in low and middle income countries all over the world. So diabetes is an epigenetic disease where if you have a sort of genetic propensity towards developing diabetes, and then you pour on top of that a high carb, high sugar diet, and then you add a bunch of stress, we call it allostatic stress, the inflammation and the exogenous sugar and all of the things eventually you start with insulin resistance, and then the pancreas eventually poops out. And anyway, and then you have a diabetic person. So what the diet that is available to the patients I take care of is the problem. And this is a thing that happens a lot. And it was true for me when I got to Guatemala. I thought, we just need to do education. We just need to tell people how to eat differently. They can do that. And that will help fix their diabetes situation. And it's an education problem. But the more that I spent time in the community, went to people's houses, walked around, navigated these little narrow alleyways, I began to see that the food that is available when you make $1 a day it's not vegetables and protein, which is really what you need to be eating as a diabetes person. Like you need to be avoiding anything that's made of like white refined flours, including corn tortillas and rice and pasta and bread. But white bread is like one of the cheapest things you can get to eat there. You can get a stack of tortillas for like a couple of cents. And then if you go to none of the tap water is drinkable in Guatemala. Like what comes if you are lucky enough to have running water available to you, which many of the people I take care of actually just don't even have that. But if you have water, the water is not, you can't just drink it without getting sick. It's full of bacteria and parasites. So then you have to go buy drinking water. And when you go to buy drinking water at the tienda, there's another liquid there that's the same price that has sugar and caffeine in it. And so many people just drink soda all day and don't drink what's called agua pura. So I've been, after a couple of years of that, of feeling pretty hopeless about the state of education. Or it's not even the state of education, but like the prospects for education. And the more I read, I realized that like educating patients, especially that live in poverty, is not an evidence-based way to change outcomes. It does not affect end outcomes hardly at all, which is a hard thing to admit for those of us who love education. And I think that education is about human dignity. Like it is important for my patients to know what they should eat, what would be better for them to eat than what they're currently eating. But the reality is that they can't make sustained change over time because of the food that's available. So I started working on a public health degree. And mostly that work is about food policy, things like taxing sugar-sweetened beverages. So Mexico has a sugar-sweetened beverage tax it's like an excise tax of 10%. And it made a difference in behaviors. Not a big difference, but a difference, like a meaningful difference. And it was a little bit regressive in that it mostly affected poor families.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, people are drinking a little bit more plain water and a little bit less soda in Mexico because of that tax. So we were working on advocating for policy in Guatemala. I had a productive meeting with the Minister of Health recently, and just talking about how policy can slowly over time change the food environment. And it might not meaningfully impact my patients now, but it'll impact their kids and their kids' kids, and hopefully work towards just like a healthier environment for people to live in. So we might not be able to fix poverty, but we can work on some things that alleviate or mitigate the damage that it does. So, and I think one of the things that we get asked a lot is why we do this as missionaries and not as like development workers. Because in a lot of ways, it's very similar to the work that's being done by like the Pan American Health Organization, which is a, part of the UN, or, other big international kind of secular NGOs. And the thing for me is that we are motivated by the love of Christ, and the kind of the arc that runs through our story is care for humans and concern for human flourishing. And I think that is what animates most Christian missionaries, especially in the medical or mercy work fields. And if that's what animates you and that's what propels you into the field, and you're following Jesus and trying to do what you can in your everybody has their own little hungry hillside, and you bring your fishes and loaves and God gets to multiply it. I think that missionaries should be working on things like policy where they can, and helping influence like the power structures around the lives that people live. So anyway, it's been a really interesting process the last few years to get more into that part of work. And I keep going to Zone 3 where I work and taking care of patients and doing a lot of wound care and adjusting meds and fretting over people's renal function. But it's been really satisfying and hopeful to also get to work on the other part of it. So
yeah, you're doing the medical work. You're doing standard of care to the best of your ability with the resources you have, but also not turning a blind eye to the root issue. I know. Yeah. I keep a glass right next to my faucet. I strongly recommend this. We don't drink enough water, so first thing in the morning, I'll fill that up with a glass of water. And very often I think, God, what a gift that I can just drink this glass of tap water.
Yeah, it is. It's an incredible. It's one of the things
that we're reminded when we come back.
Our kids always freak out when we get to a U.S. airport and they have those little water dispensers with filtered water. I mean, it's true in Europe too. Like the developed world has drinkable tap water for the most part. And we worry about microplastics, and some people in America are filtering their water, and I don't want to weigh in about that. But generally speaking, we're thrilled to get to drink the tap water. And it's something that should be available to everyone everywhere.
Yeah.
It's, wild to me that it isn't. So anyway.
Jeff, tell us about how you have gotten to take the skills that you've learned in mental health.
Yeah.
Going to a culture that is different than where you trained, and how you are using those skills to the best of your ability to serve the people in Guatemala.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. How would I describe it? Like it was this long, windy process. And it feels like a second doctorate. Like
I bet learning on the job,
retraining.
What are you doing? Who are your patients?
Yeah,
your clients?
It's such a mix because honestly, there's only 3 of us in country, and so there's 18 million people and 3 doctoral level psychologists. One is 85, the other is in his early 60s, and then there's me.
Wow.
There are many
there's other
bachelor's level psychologists that do something approximate to therapy, but it's not the same thing.
It's a mix. Yeah. And so initially it was more education. And so some of that was getting my Spanish up to speed. So I could, present in Spanish and do like a PowerPoint and be involved. And that was more for me, like gathering information, getting a sense of like, who are my people, my patients, and like culturally, like what's going on, because I don't know. And And then it's kind of it was upended a little bit with like COVID. So I made it to about 2019. And then I continued with language acquisition. And it was probably about like 3 years in where, like, not wanting to do harm, my Spanish teacher out in Shela said, I've got this single mom. She's bilingual, and I don't know what to do. Would you help her? I was like, okay, yeah, I'm happy to. And that was like the spark that I needed, where I was like, not dragging my feet, but feeling like I was not quite at that level I wanted to be. But I'm so passionate about like being a therapist that that's what I needed to build on, and knowing that it's really amazing like how much vocabulary there is. Like I had studied Spanish and lived in Mexico like 20 years prior, but very different. And Spanish is very regional, and it's a very diverse culture and people. And so I felt like I was really in the deep end and speaking like a child and very incompetent. And so that was hard for me, but a good season too, where I think I was meeting with too many clients here and a little burnt out and crispy. So I felt like God used that. So it really upended the structure that I had known, but I still felt called. And again, like I felt like God used that. And so it was those meetings and doing talks for like the Spanish Gospel Coalition or showing up in churches and just all the little conversations you have like at the hardware store or like the grocery store or just meeting your neighbors where I felt like I got a better sense of like, who am I meeting with and hearing their stories. Some of them are very difficult stories. And that it's a very, like there's parallels as far as like how trauma is like realized, but I didn't know exactly like quite what it was. But
your client mix now,
it's such a mix. So because there's not I think people found out there's like, oh, there's a Christian psychologist here in country. And so I've added couples counseling. That's a recent thing where before I was just doing individual work, and that's been super meaningful. And some, like during COVID, I started online, even though I was hesitant. It's like I really want to meet in person because I think it's so important.
Like telemedicine visits?
Yeah. And so I did that for a while. And then I think people like hit a point, and Guatemala's quite a bit behind, but really wanted to meet in person. So now I'm meeting with a mix of folks on our patio, or I'm helping out with the Peace Corps, and they have like 180 volunteers in country, and then also at the U.S. Embassy. And so I love it because of just the variety of clients that I meet with and the diversity. And so it's about 50-50 with nationals. And there's others, like many throughout Latin America that have come as well and that are involved in ministry. So it's been great to have a mix of clients. So I don't know if I'm answering the question, probably not, but but like thinking about like the dailies, it's looked a little bit different. So we were in the city for 3 years, and now we've moved further out from the city. Abbie still commutes, but one of us needed to be closer for the girls. And Abbie's in grad school working on her master's in public health. Yeah. And so I'm very much in this small town in Guatemala and have my local haunts and building those relationships and kind of like a parish model, which I really like. And so I feel like it's been sweet to be involved in the church that way and to be a resource and available. Where before I tried to do that and it was like too much being, I was serving as an elder in our local church
here in Portland,
and trying to be a father and a full-time clinical psychologist, friend, and all the things. And I burned out a bit. I didn't realize like physically you can show up, but there's a psychological cost. And so I feel like now I've got a bit more of a better balance in what that looks like. And then also the structure is very different, where I do have formal sessions with clients, but much of it too is unstructured. And that was another part where I was kind of hesitant, where it's like, I think they need therapy and they benefit from it. But either pride or worrying about like being recalled as missionaries, like from the field, or like not sure what to do.
Yes.
But it'd be, opening our home or someone coming and crying on our couch.
We keep a box of Kleenex by the couch.
Or like going for a run or a cup of coffee. And so things that I really, it was essentially what I hoped for in being an elder, and like more pastoral counseling. And so there's that mix too, which I love.
I do think, so for me, when we met all those years ago, I did not really know what psychologists do. Like I think maybe this generation that's behind us is a lot more literate with therapy and the idea of counseling. But it was over time I started to realize what a gift it is for someone to be able to come to see Jeff and like bring their anxiety and their psychological issues, their depression, their trauma, their insomnia, their thoughts of self-harm, and to just dump it out. And then he helps them sort of sort through it and make sense of it and figure out what's connected to what. And then because your background was a little bit more CBT,
cognitive therapy.
Yes, cognitive behavioral therapy.
Actually. Behavioral therapy.
But it's so useful in terms of like actually achieving a better outcome and like people's symptoms improve over time with therapy.
We're kind of using that as like a redemptive story,
yeah,
like a new narrative, and so we're not diminishing like what had happened or the real suffering that people experience, but walking with them and working on reframing that or reconstructing like what that means now and reconciling those difficult realities. But
I think that work is so important in the church.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we think the church should be doing this. That's why we're there.
And to support the people. I mean, the original call for Jeff as a psychologist, a missionary psychologist to Guatemala, was to support the local church and to support a network of ministries doing ministry work all over the city in various capacities. People working in schools and youth mentoring and medical clinics and children's homes and, and people that all have, by dint of the work they do, vicarious trauma at least, if not their own stuff from behind. And so the need and the call that he responded to was to help the helpers basically, and to build emotional health in pastors and ministry workers. And what that's really developed into over the last 7 years is that you have become kind of a specialist in cross-cultural workers.
Yeah, so frontline
So like
workers
for
that
people that are
or
living not in their passport country, that are helping sort of work, whether they're working for a nonprofit or a big organization, or they're working as a missionary or what have you.
or maybe like
and they're struggling with it.
Through our own like personal experience and sufferings.
Yeah.
Well, I would say too, keep the telemedicine option open, and I'd also say telephone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's been interesting. Like, because I think a lot of people have actually been open to phone therapy.
There's actually, Nick and I got to discovered a counselor that we really needed and was really helpful in kind of breaking through some of our thought patterns that weren't accurate, but we didn't know how to kind of get in that place of truth again. And we loved talking to him on the phone. We just put him on speaker, and then Nick and I could exchange our own facial expressions as we were talking, and it was delightful. So I love how proximity is not a requirement for getting help and thinking healthy and prioritizing our relationships of unity and of good communication.
Yeah, definitely.
No, I'm thankful for the medium.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does. Like, it really opens access. So I think of a couple I was meeting with, they're in Guatemala City, and so it's 2 hours each way.
Oh, yeah.
And it would be a barrier to actually doing couples work.
All right, you two, we're at time. What can people, how can people find out more about your work and learn how to support? If you're really striking a chord, I'm sure you could use more people coming alongside, lifting you up.
So I have a newsletter. It used to be just like a missionary newsletter that I wrote to people that we really knew that read our letters. And now there's like several hundred people that read our newsletters that I don't know at all. So anyway, it's a Substack. And I think it's Jeff and Abbie Nelson at substack.com, but we can put it in the
show notes.
Put it in the show notes. And there's a link. There's a link to our organization page there. If you wanted to support our work, we always could use support. But yeah, I write a newsletter about every quarter, and I try to be really descriptively honest about the struggle of the work we do, because so much of what we do is hard, and but it's beautiful and it's worth knowing about, and I'm really grateful for the people that follow along. And anyway, so it comes out about quarterly, so it's not very often, but
your newsletter is a trigger to me to stop what I'm doing and enjoy your writing. Because I think if you weren't in
I was a great
medicine, you would
writer.
be an author.
Yes.
And then pray for the work that you're doing. Because
Yeah.
I definitely see God motivating you, in you, working through you. And I'm grateful to call you friends.
Yeah, thanks.
Keep up the good work.
Yeah, we're
Yeah, thank
grateful
you.
for the friendship as well. So